Hey everybody, how we doing today? Mark Zano here, Christ Center Capital. Today is we're making another video, another week where the market is just looking awful. I mean, if you are signed up for the newsletter, you are getting all the great information of how crypto is plunging, how the Dow has hit, its 2022 low, how all the major indexes are down at least 4% just from last week. Yeah, the market's not looking good. It's not looking good for investors, no matter how you slice it. And we wanted to take today as an opportunity, instead of giving more picks or evaluating more individual stocks or more individual assets, we wanted to, since there's not really good recommendations right now, though technically almost everything is a good recommendation because it's a good buy time since things are low if you are willing to sit on them for the long term. But we've covered, those kind of gold standard rules for investing in many other videos. Today, we're going to talk about inverse ETFs. Kind of a more philosophical approach to it. I highly suggest people go check out the post that is on the ChristCenterCapital.com website. It is much more informative. I'm just going to give a really brief overview. Um, and honestly, I'm going to talk a little bit more about the philosophy behind it from a Christian perspective than I am going to talk about what inverse ETFs actually are because, hey, everyone's got Google and everyone's got Investopedia. You can look that up and get that information really easily, right? And the post on the Christ Center Capital website, which I can show you right here, it gives you a bunch of different links where you can find out what an inverse ETF is, how it's constructed, a good little explainer video, a real life example, all that good stuff, right? That is on the website. You can check that out if you want to figure out what an inverse ETF is. If you already know what an inverse ETF is and you want to know a little bit more about C3's philosophy when they're talking about them or how we deal with inverse ETFs, then this video is more for you. So let's go all the way down to the bottom of the post again. And we have three questions. It might be hard for you guys to see, but I'll just, for my own reference, three questions we need to think about when we're talking about investing morality from a Christian perspective. All right? We don't have hard and fast answers to these questions, but they're questions we should give time to. Question number one, is it morally acceptable to invest in something, do nothing with it, and then sell it for a profit at a later time? What role does intention play in this scenario? Question number two, is betting against something the best way to use your God given capital? Or should we always look to promote the good rather than beat down the evil? What's the difference? Question number three, how much attention should we pay to things that are not tangible in regard to wealth? Now, those three questions are loaded and multiple parts, and they're a bit complex, and they probably don't have straightforward answers. But they're questions we believe that the Christian investor should be thinking about, especially when it comes to inverse ETFs. Now, I'm not going to bore everybody with what we think about ETFs in general here at C3 because we've talked about that at length. I've actually linked a couple posts in the post about inverse ETFs, about our philosophy on ETFs in general. But for those people who have been kind of following us for a while, they know that we don't really have um, good feelings towards ETFs just because of the broadness that they have and the inability to know what you're really investing in on a very nuanced and minute level. When we talk about investing in ETF and inverse ETFs, we're essentially betting against something. And that already begs the question. We're First off, we're skipping over the questions of whether ETFs in general are good moral investments, but we're then talking about inverse ETFs and we're thinking like, should we be betting against things or should we only be promoting things? Probably both and is the answer to that question. We should be, to use extreme examples, in the case of abortion, do we just scream at Planned Parenthood, you're killing babies? Which of course they are, but do we scream that? Or do we take the approach of promoting the goodness and the virtue and the beauty of motherhood and parenthood. We believe that a lot of times you get more bees with honey than you do with vinegar, and promoting the good of something is much more, we'll use the word profitable or even evangelistic than it is just constantly beating down the bad. Now, that's an extreme analogy when you undress it and take it to the stock market and a thing such as an inverse ETF where you may be betting against something, but it's at least worth giving a little bit of thought. Now, I know some people get a little frustrated, or I would get frustrated watching these videos because I don't give a whole lot of absolute answers to things. And that's because when it comes to investing, there is a lot of pitfalls that can lead to evil, but there's not a lot of inherent evil. Now, let's talk about that a little bit. When we deal with things like stocks, cryptos, ETFs, a lot of those things are what we would call abstract. They have like some tangible effects. They could be considered tangible in some cases, but a lot of those things are very abstract. And the same reason we don't like the metaverse as Christians, because we're giving up God's reality for something that is, an imitation of it, is the same reason that we kind of have caution when we deal with things that are very abstract, the things that are not as tangible, like, uh, you know, the US currency used to be backed by gold, something that was very tangible, something that the earth produced, something that, we could hold in our hands and feel the weight. And now it's not backed by anything except for the good faith of the US government. And that becomes a very intangible thing. That's a very abstract thing. That's in just as a rule of thumb, like abstract things are not as reliable as those tangible things. And not to have a complete materialistic view of the world, that's not what we're going for. But when we're talking about wealth and currency and how we exchange goods, it's something to really give some thought to. Now, moving on from here, we'll talk a little bit about looking at the post over here. Let's talk about just like a real world example. So the ticker symbol SPDN, it's a direct on inverse ETF of the SPY, the S&P 500. When you invest in the SPDN, you are simply placing a bet, or from a macro level, you're just simply placing a bet that the SPY would go down. Some people make the case that since there are so many immoral companies in the SPY, that investing into the SPDN, you're doing a justice there. You're doing a moral good because you're betting against the bad. And again, this goes back to our point that we raised. Should we be putting our efforts, our God given capital, our minds to beating down the bad or promoting the good? And how do we decipher the difference between those two? So again, this is really just meant to be a thought-provoking video, and I hope that you go and read the post. There's a little bit more concrete answers there, but again, it's still more of a thought-provoking post, both in the website and this video, because that's really the goal of Christ-centered capital. We want people to start thinking about moral investing in a really, really in-depth way. Because for far too long, the financial world has kind of pulled the cover over our eyes and done what it willed, and it's been solely out for profit. And another thing that we bring up in that post is making money is not immoral. Making money is not an evil. Solely pursuing the making money, no matter what the ends are, is immoral. Because the ends can never justify the means. And if you're just looking to accumulate wealth as much as possible by any means possible, then the gospel is not something you're taking seriously. Because we can all reference about a million different points of Christ speaking about kind of the pitfalls of mammon, right? So anyway, go check out the site. as I always say, go sign up for the newsletter, all that good stuff. We would appreciate it. But again, this is a bit more of a thought-provoking post. I'm sorry for disappointing people and not giving like straightforward answers here. I would say that inverse ETFs, they don't really sit well with us here at Christ Center Capital, nor do they sit well with our contributors. But they are not an inherent evil, we don't think. But when you deal with the abstractions, when you deal with betting against things, when you deal with an asset that is solely there to make a profit, you're not actually like supporting a company, you're not actually supporting a product or a service. There's a lot of gray, wishy-washy area there. Anyway, thanks for listening. We love you. We appreciate you. Please go to check out the site and leave a like, subscribe, comment, all that good stuff here if you can. God bless.